it feels like if you asked me who I am or how I identify, I'm an emergency nurse. And so it's exciting to be part of just the bigger scope of that, because you want to see change and you want to see equitable education and you want to see, like less workplace violence and all the issues that we face globally. And so I thought the only way to make the change is I can sit on the couch and complain about it, or I can get involved and do my small part. And so I started provincially in Alberta as a rep with NENA, and then I became the president of Alberta, and then I became the director of Alberta on national, and then I became the president.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everybody, Kevin McFarland here from the Art of Emergency Nursing, and thanks as always for downloading this episode, and thanks for listening to the podcast. I appreciate it. If you haven't done so yet, please leave a rating and review. That's a great way that you can help the show out and help other people find this show. Don't forget to tell your friends about the podcast. Make sure they're listening as well. I always appreciate that. I have a great episode planned for you today with a nurse who's a nurse educator, and she's the president of the Canadian Emergency Nursing Association. I had a chance to meet her recently at the National ENA conference, and boy, we became fast friends. You are going to love this episode with my friend, Dawn.
Hey, my name is obviously Dawn Peta, and I'm a nurse in Alberta, Southern Alberta. So for most people, we always say it's just above Montana. We're an hour from the border. And I currently work as a clinical nurse instructor. So I cover 8 rural sites, and rural being out of those 8, 3 of them have maternity. So I have to cover maternity education, as well as they all have Emerg departments and then acute care floors. And a few of them have actually ORs. So it's like a master of none, but a task of many. It can be a little daunting. It's definitely a specialty in itself, rural nursing. I have a whole new respect for it.
I bet. Did you start your career in a rural setting, or were you more urban?
No, I started urban. Funny, I started when I graduated nursing was when a lot of the nurses from Canada were going to the States, because we had a whole bunch of hospital closures due to government. And so we were told about 6 months before we were going to graduate that there probably wouldn't be any jobs. And I was a single mom at the time. And so I worked at 7-Eleven part-time and worked casual whenever they'd call me to the local, actually seniors health. So I worked in a geriatric hospital and honestly loved it. Loved working with the seniors. Thought I found my place. Our seniors have a lot to tell us, the stories that they share, and it's sad at the end of their lives when they're in some of these places and they don't have family that visit. And then unfortunately, they started to take nurses, RNs, I should say, out of the long-term care facilities, and we're putting the LPNs in there because it was obviously cheaper. And so at that point, I had moved over to the regional hospital, and we only have one in my city. And I went to the floor where I preceptored. So it was a telemetry, like a medical unit. And so once I got back in the hospital, I think I really realized, oh, you know what? This is for me. I love cardiac. And then I was there for 2 years, and then I went to ICU for 5 years, and then eventually found my home when I went to Emerg, and I worked urban Emerg for 11 years full time until my health started to decline. And so I just couldn't work those 12-hour shifts anymore. And then I had the opportunity to become an educator. So yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. I love seeing emergency nurses in education, because it's again, like you said, that jack of all trades. You get a little bit of everything in the emergency department, and being able to share that with students is a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
Very cool. So you mentioned you finished nursing school, and then you were working at 7-Eleven full-time and working part-time as a nurse. Holy cow. How did that feel, like finishing your nursing degree and then still working at 7-Eleven?
So back when I graduated, it was diploma nursing still. So 1994. So didn't get a job. Like I said, I was a single mom. There was no jobs here, so couldn't move. So I went registered to get my degree because I thought, what am I going to do next? But I had to work to pay the bills. So I had a full-time job at 7-Eleven and just did school through online courses, the ones that I could take online. And whenever they had a shift on the weekend or something where I could work at the hospital, I took that opportunity so I could keep some of my experience. So it was humbling to say the least because, people see you and they come in 7-Eleven. It's like, well, I thought you were going to school. And it's like, I'm a nurse, but I can't get a job. So here I am at 7-Eleven. So, but it's an honest job. And I think it made me the nurse that I am. Right. So
that's cool. One of the things I find is with new nurses, these new nurses would come through and they'd interview for residency positions and they'd be like, I don't really have much experience, but they have experience as either a waitress or in customer service. And it's all the same stuff. It's all the same. It's all customer service in a lot of ways. And I know not every nurse likes it when I say that, but really nursing is customer service. And that's a big part
100%.
It's a big part of what we do. So it's one of those that there's a lot of transferable skills there.
Yeah, for sure.
So holy cow, that's quite the journey to go from working 7-Eleven to working as a nurse and starting in the senior centers and then working your way into the hospital. So how long did you do emergency nursing?
So I started in Emerg in 2008, and then I still work casual in the Lethbridge Emerg. And I actually work in a few of my rural emerges because one of them's about 20 minutes from the city that I live in and the other one's 35 minutes. Yeah, but because of my health, I just work 4 and 6 hour shifts, mostly triage, which is okay because I love triage. And
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Very cool. Now you're also very actively involved in the Canadian equivalent of the Emergency Nursing Association. Tell us a little bit about that.
I would love to. I wouldn't say we're equivalent because I don't think there's anything that could compare to ENA because it's just pretty amazing. But for us in Canada, we have the National Emerg Nurse Association, or NENA, and I am the current president of the association. And again, it's just exciting to be part of something that it feels like if you asked me who I am or how I identify, I'm an emergency nurse. And so it's exciting to be part of just the bigger scope of that because you want to see change and you want to see equitable education and you want to see, less workplace violence and all the issues that we face globally. And so I thought the only way to make the change is I can sit on the couch and complain about it, or I can get involved and do my small part. And so I started provincially in Alberta as a rep with NENA, and then I became the president of Alberta, and then I became the director of Alberta on national, and then I became the president.
That's awesome. How cool is that? Now, how many members are there for NENA?
So currently we sit at about 1,061. However, Quebec is rejoining us, which is very exciting. And that will bring us 600 more members. So
wow.
Quebec had separated from us a while back. And so they're just back at the table, which really makes it feel like we really are a country united. We have the same goals. And so those little differences shouldn't separate the bigger goals. So I'm very excited about that.
That's exciting to get them back in the fold and 600 more members. Holy cow, you guys are going to be busy.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're all volunteers. So that makes it a little bit harder. We don't get things done as quickly as other organizations, but eventually we get it done. So that's good.
Yeah. One advantage that ENA has is that they have so many paid staff that do so much of what they do.
Yeah.
So now, does NENA have a paid staff or do they do like a journal and all that kind of stuff?
We have a journal and it is an open access journal. And I have to be honest with you, pretty proud of it. And they're volunteers. They work tirelessly. And then our only other 2 paid staff is we have a bookkeeper accountant, just because of our TNCC and ENPC courses and our CTAS. And then she has an assistant. So she's part-time. The assistant is part-time. And then everyone else is volunteers.
Nice. That's awesome. So do you guys teach TNCC and ENPC up there as well?
Very actively. We're probably the biggest, other than the United States. We teach the most TNCC and ENPC courses that there are. And I'm pretty excited about that. And we actually, ENA just translated TNCC and ENPC in French. So we're actually able to offer it in both languages, and it can be taught in French as well, as the exams are now, they're able to write their exams in French where they weren't able to do that before. So that's very exciting.
That is exciting. Holy cow. How cool. I think sometimes us local folks here in the States tend to forget that ENA is a global organization. And as evidenced by the International Nursing Committee and the international reps that we have, which is super cool. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I think sometimes we tend to think that it's just a US thing, but it's not. It's global.
It is global. And I can tell you from my years, like even before I was an educator for AHS, we would look like, what does ENA say about this? So we would be looking at your guys' professional scope and standards of practice and at your position statements. And so the impact that ENA has across the world is immense. And so it's exciting that they've actually taken that global leadership and we're actually moving it forward in other ways. So I'm really excited. Like Canada right now we're looking at having an alliance with ENA. I mean, we've just are kind of at the beginning stages, but it seems like a no-brainer because ENA has a lot to offer that as volunteers, we just can't get done. And so it's why work so hard when some of that work is done? Why not align with like-minded organizations and, together we can do more. So
100%. That's cool. How cool to be. It just makes the world seem smaller, right? Like, because we all have the same problems. Every emergency nurse. One of the things I did, it was during International Nurses Week, and I may do that again this year. During International Nurses Week, I interviewed nurses from all over the world. And one of the things I found in a lot of places is that nursing's nursing. It's a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same challenges, and a lot of the same problems to where I was like, wow, this makes me feel like it's global and patients are patients.
Absolutely.
And taking care of people is taking care of people. And some of the stories I got from those episodes were just crazy. I spoke to a woman in Israel who just talked about, we have terrorist threats all the time, and bombings and everything else, and just talked about it like it was no big deal. And I was just like blown away by that. I keep trying to get her on the International ENA Committee. I keep telling her she needs to apply and
absolutely
trying to get her to come to a conference one of these days. But it's because I'd love to meet her in person. That we had such great conversations. But yeah, it's just cool to see that it's all the same.
Yeah.
So it's awesome. Now, what made you decide to become a nurse in the first place? Why nursing?
I never thought I'd grow up and be a nurse. I always thought, funny is 9 to 5 Dolly Parton. I always thought, man, that lady is just beautiful. And I like that she's the secretary, but she's really the boss at the organization. And it was a friend of mine that said, oh, I'm going to go into nursing. And I had tried out a little bit of business and was like, it's not for me. So I decided to do it. I was volunteering at a senior center and thought, well, you know what, I like this. So I went into it and you know what, it was meant to be because I definitely found who I am. Right.
That's awesome. I love when I hear that. That's just so cool to hear. Very cool. Tell me about a patient that you took care of in the emergency department that changed the way you practice. Something that you learned that you now pass on to your students who you're looking after now.
Yep. So for me, I think I thought about that long and hard. And I was like, I think as Emerg nurses, we kind of get caught up in, you see the same patients over and over again. And we get lazy. We get lazy in our triaging. We get lazy in our own practice because it just seems what's easier is what we do. And so it happened to be a homeless lady that had some drug and alcohol issues. And I wasn't the one that triaged her. I was charged that day, but she had came in the same old problems and was just put into a bed fully clothed. The nurses, we have some nurse driven protocols where we can order labs and stuff like that. So whomever the nurse was that had brought her back and was taking care of her had thrown some labs in the computer. So the lab obviously had come at some point and taken the patient's labs. So how I got involved was the Emerg physician came and he's like to me, because I was charged, and he's like, why is this patient not undressed? And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And he goes, She has a lactate of 14. I can't wake her up. Like, she's sick. What's going on? And so I go in there and sure enough, like, she's unresponsive. We can't make her up. Her vitals are in her boots. Her labs were horrible. She ended up getting intubated and taken to ICU. But what I most remember about that situation was it could have been me, because we all do it. We think, oh, it's just her again. It's just the same old, she's drunk. Let's turn her on her side. That's really all she needs. And it's made me change my own practice from that. And I teach all of my staff, because I teach the staff at all the hospitals, is that just remember that somebody that can't protect their airway, they need to be monitored and they need to be viewed. So even though they're just one of them, or, the people that we see over and over again, it's still someone's mother, someone's daughter, it's your sister. They're still human. Nobody chooses to be an alcoholic. Nobody chooses to be addicted to drugs. They may have made a choice at one time that any of us could have made. And now ultimately it's what controls their life. And so it really made me learn how to be more compassionate again, because I think we lose that along the way.
Sometimes like compassion fatigue is a real thing, man. I think we've all experienced it to some degree. And in some places where you're like, whatever, it's all the same. It's not going to change. I can't change anything.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, because you ultimately, who suffers is the patient. And if the patient's not getting the care they need, because we're hardened and they'll be fine. They'll be okay. We can really miss big stuff. So
yeah. And she ultimately died. And that was the real thing that hit home, was that maybe that would have been the end, outcome for her at some point. But I'm just sad that I was working the day that became a part of that. And so it wasn't like pointing fingers. It was kind of just a reflection back for all of us of how could we do better going forward.
Yeah,
so
100%. I think we're always looking to improve, and hopefully we're always looking to improve and be better nurses and take better care of our patients. Do you remember your first medical error? First time you made a medical error?
Yes. I think the one that is the hardest for me actually wasn't so long ago. I want to say it was 3 years ago. And I was working out at one of my rural sites. So it's just you as the RN, and then you have an LPN. This day it happened to be me as an RN, and the LPN had been sick. So another RN who had 10 more years experience than me was working with me. So we were so happy that we were working together, and it was the worst shift of my life. So I work in a busy Emerg in the city. But that day in that little rural ER, we had started out with a vehicle rollover. And that patient had a lac to her liver that had to get transferred out. And then I had this seizing baby that came in. And long story short it was the Dilantin. So the baby came in, it was the 3-year-old. And so he was seizing and the mom was carrying him. So the other nurse said, put him on the scale, because he had stopped seizing by this time, and to get a weight on him. And it wasn't set to kilograms. It was on pounds, but didn't think about it at that time. So in the rural Emerg, you are the unit clerk. There is nobody else. So while I'm registering the patient, she's in the room, getting an IV, I'm calling the doctor, and the doctor comes and is like, you know what, let's get some Dilantin. And so I'm in the med room and we're yelling across the Emerg, what's the weight? And she said 20. And I'm thinking 20 kilos, but it was 20 pounds. So anyways, this child ended up getting double dose of Dilantin. And the real kicker was when this child got transferred to the city where I live, with the coworkers that I have, that they could call back and tell me, do you realize you made this error? And I was just, first of all, I was obviously devastated that I had done that. And even more devastated that you had time to call me and tell me what I did wrong. Anyways, of course, I RLS'd it, which is a reported learning system. I had let the receiving physician know. I let our Emerg doctor know. I mean, the good thing the pediatrician has said to me, well, you stopped their seizures. And the worst thing I did was look up what the complications could be. And so I was just devastated. But I used it as an opportunity to tell my staff when I do their rural skills days is, you know what, it can happen to somebody with 20 years experience, somebody with 2 years experience, someone with 30 years experience.
Amen.
And we just have to be able to acknowledge it and learn from it and just know that to err is human. And now I will always make sure I'm like, is that kilograms or is that pounds?
Do your ERs lock there? Because I know like some scales will lock into either kilos or pounds. And one of the things that we always did was we were like, okay, make sure like pounds isn't even an option for this. Like
now they did from that, but ours were so old that it was broken. So you had to manually do it and whoever had used it last didn't. And so it was just assumed. So that's the problem.
Yep. It gets you every time. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's probably 100 people listening to this podcast who probably had either the same error or had a really close call with that same kilos to pounds kind of errors. Holy cow. That's not uncommon at all. So.
But I almost quit. Like I didn't work back there for almost 2 years because I was just so disappointed in myself. And, you know, like, oh, everybody knows because the comment that I had heard from a girlfriend of mine that was working in the Emerg when the charge nurse called me was they were all sitting there talking about, well, I can't believe Dawn did that. Like she's an educator. She should know better. And a girlfriend had told me that. And I was just like, wow, like you guys are my coworkers. And if you know, why would you even be talking about it? It's not ethical. And again, nobody sets out to make a mistake.
Yeah, and nobody's doing this on purpose. Even our most brilliant educators can make errors, and there's stuff you just don't know. I think one of the most important things you can do as an experienced ER nurse is realize that you don't know everything. Mm-hmm. I love it when I get a chance to talk to such smart nurses everywhere. And when we're always learning from each other, but every now and then it'll be like, hey, have you heard of this or have you done that? And they haven't heard of it or haven't done that. And I'm like, oh, let me teach you a little something. And just having that opportunity to do a little bit of teaching to brilliant educators, like everyone's learning. Nobody's got this all figured out. So.
Well, and that's what I say to my staff all the time. I said, you know what? We're always learning and you always need to be teachable because there's stuff. Nursing is a science. So evidence is going to come out. Things are going to change. And so you always have to be prepared to move along with that change.
100%. And everything, that's one thing that's constant in nursing is just the change. From the time you became a nurse to now, what's one of those big changes that you see in your nursing practice that like you used to do or that you learned as a nursing student that now you're like, oh yeah, we don't do that anymore?
Yeah. Two things. I think the biggest one is when I graduated nursing, we used to do, that range of motion and bed baths on patients who were bedbound, but even range of motion on our patients. And it was, you interviewed them, right? And so you spent that time with them and we've really lost the art of that. So that's one thing, the physical. The other thing I would say is with MIs, with our STEMIs, right? It was MONA, right? Morphine, oxygen, nitro. And we've really moved away from that because we know oxygen is a free radical and it can actually grow the area of infarct. So we don't just put non-rebreathers on everybody that's having a heart attack. And then recently I just learned about morphine. It's actually not recommended either because it actually decreases the antiplatelet effect of the medications that we give. I was like,
I remember
wow.
hearing that. Now, I don't know if the practice has changed on that yet, though. As the science evolves, of course, there's always things that change. I don't know. I don't know if MONA, I think a lot of people still teach MONA and still do MONA, but I don't know how. I think oxygen, we all realize, just need to throw that on everybody, which I remember as a brand new EMT, we'd be like, just put oxygen on, maybe fine. Yeah. You can't go around with 15 liters on a non-rebreather. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting change. It's an interesting change. So.
Yeah, we give fentanyl now. Up here, the practice is changing with the morphine. And when our new protocols come out, they'll probably, fentanyl will be the recommended drug over morphine.
Over morphine? Mm-hmm. I wonder if AHA has updated that. The AHA updated that already? Do you know?
I don't think so. And up here, it was just a new finding from some studies that were just completed. And so I had attended the conference and Claire Pusey, who is the STEMI educator at our Foothills, which is our major trauma and cardiac hospital in Alberta. she had just said that they were just changing their practice at the foothills. And then when they rewrite or update the protocol the next time, they will implement those changes into it.
Nice. Yeah, you're right. That's why they call it the practice of nursing, is things change and things are different. So tell me about a patient that you'll never forget, a patient that absolutely touched your heart.
So I had just started working in the Emerg department, and I had worked ICU for 5 years. I mean, you see death, you experience it. And I was co-team leader that day, and we had heard about a house explosion. And the first patient that came in was the grandma that was on oxygen. She was one of our COPD patients, and she had lit a smoke and blew up the house and came in. What we weren't expecting was that 15 minutes later, there was a 5-year-old that was sleeping down in the basement that nobody had known was down there because, one of the grandparents went to drive the other grandparent. And so this was great grandma watched the child. Anyways, so they brought in this child. And so, you're mentally preparing that, okay, we've just stabilized this patient and now we're going to get a child. And I think for me, it was your rational head knows that she wasn't burned. She died from carbon monoxide. So she was pink. And your rational head knows, okay, well, she's been down for more than 20, 30 minutes. But because she's pink, you just want to do everything. And it's a kid. Yeah. And so, me and the doctor, and we had our team, we were working on her. We worked on her for another, I want to say 30 minutes to 40 minutes, knowing that it's probably not going to be a good outcome. But the mother in the hallway, just that guttural cry. Oh. It just devastated me. When they called it and stuff, I was just like, I just can't, I can't finish today. I can't nurse. I can't be here. I just can't do this. And I really questioned it. It even to this day, it still bothers me. But for, I want to say a good year, I just thought I can't do this anymore. I didn't save her. We didn't save her. We could have done better. What did we miss? And I think we've all had those patients that touch you a little bit different regardless of age. But I think for any of us, kids are those ones they're just not supposed to die. And she was just perfect, right? Not a burn. You could understand if she burned to death, right? But she died in her sleep, which was just even harder because she just looked perfect.
Oh my gosh. There's nothing that will prepare you for the cry, the guttural cry of someone who's lost someone in that real moment. And that's something that nurses unfortunately know all too well. And something that, if we are non-nurses, I hope you never have to experience hearing that. But it just hits your core.
It does.
So nothing you've ever seen before. Oh, man, those are tough ones.
They are. The kids are always hard. I remember when I first came down to the Emerg, I actually was working with nurses. So I had a brother when he was 8 that was hit and killed by a truck. He ran out between 2 parked cars, and I hadn't seen him get hit, but I was the first, because I was just babysitting right next to where it happened, where I saw him laying on the road. Don't remember the experience at all, but I work with some of the nurses that were working that day. And when I got my first child in the Emerg, just the compassion of my coworkers that were like, you don't need to deal with this, and I had to go in and deal with it because I had to overcome that in my practice. And actually the patient had already expired. It was just wrapping the body of the little boy that was the same age as my brother when he died. And you just wonder where all of that goes within you as a nurse, because we deal with so much and we kind of just push it down. And then so I think it's good for us to be able to talk about it, with our coworkers, with people that understand, right? If you don't understand, you just don't get it.
Yeah. How do you have that conversation, or how do you facilitate that now as a more experienced nurse? If you were in the same situation where there was a newer nurse who, how do you how do you prepare somebody who's a brand new nurse? How do you prepare somebody to deal with that and process that and work through that when it's hard?
It is. And
how do you have that conversation?
I think the best advice I ever got was just be human, because I always thought I can't cry. I can't cry in front of the family. That's weakness. I have to be strong. And then it just overflows and you can't help it. And so I would just say, you know what, just feel. You're allowed to feel. You're human. If you cry, that's okay. And it's not okay to just walk out of the room and think that you're alone, or that you are weak because it's making you feel like, you can't come to work the next day. Even though everybody else might come to work, you might need that mental health break, and that is okay. And I think a lot of us don't feel like, we don't do formal debriefings where I work, which is, I think, shameful. And I think that our leadership should be held accountable for that, because I think a debrief, even if it's just 5 minutes, should happen with every case, regardless of the outcome. Even a successful resuscitation, we should be debriefing that, because we have all that built up, emotion within us. And so that even when we have those outcomes that aren't well, then we're still doing that same process. So I would just encourage them to seek out help if they need it, whether it's, calling, we have employee helpline, or talking to another coworker about it, taking time off if they need it. I think that's important, that we should be made to feel that's okay.
Absolutely. I think we tend to do a lot of informal debriefing. I think as a staff and as emergency nurses, we tend to do a lot of informal debriefing that probably would benefit from having a more formal piece to it.
Yeah. Really.
But everyone's like, they want to be tough and they want to be hard and be like, I don't need it. I'm fine. The reality is sometimes there's those little patients that just get in and mess you up and make you not feel so hot.
And I think that's why a lot of Emerg nurses, if you look at statistics for even autoimmune or cancers and certain conditions, that they're saying like, a lot of it can be contributed to stress in your life. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because we do deal with a lot of stress, or any of our first responders, right?
Yeah. Because one of the things that I've always found is I know being an emergency nurse has changed me. I'm like, things that would devastate other people, I'm kind of like, oh, wow, that's really kind of sad. I'm like, oh, wow. My wife sometimes is like, gosh, you're cold. And I'm like, I'm not cold. I'm a warm person. Yeah. But there's sometimes that I'm just like I'll hear something. I'll be like, oh, all right, it's kind of interesting.
I know. I read the obituaries every day. My husband finds that quite morbid, but true.
My mom used to call that the Irish lottery. But you're right. We tend to be a little bit more, I think sometimes a little darker, maybe. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but something that other people are like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And you're kind of like, all right, okay. Next.
Yep, it's true.
And sometimes hard to share that with our partners without them thinking that we're like mentally ill.
And I think if you have a partner, I'm not sure if your wife is like healthcare, but the statistics for first responders and their marriages succeeding aren't very well. So I'm divorced, and my ex-husband just couldn't appreciate my job or the stress or unless you just, lots of people just don't get it. And it really didn't help with that. Whereas my husband that I'm currently with, he is in the healthcare profession, respiratory therapist. He just understood. He knew that when I came home and I don't want to talk or be lovey-dovey, or if I just need to go and have time to myself, sit in the tub or have a glass of wine, he just knows just to leave it. And so I think that's really important when you have a partner that can just understand that sometimes you just need to decompress when you get home or anything like that, right?
100%. And I'm lucky my wife is not in healthcare, but she's had enough healthcare experience herself that she gets it. Because sometimes you get home and you're like, I just don't want to talk. Not today. I'm done for today. I can't. We'll talk about it some other time. I just got to go to sleep,
Yeah.
Or I got to, decompress a little bit or do whatever I need to do.
Eat some chips, and it's always a good therapy. Chip therapy.
There you go. I want to talk a little bit about the health system in Canada, because I know it's a little bit different than what a lot of my audience in America are used to. And certainly not that all my audience is American, because they're not. But how is the Canadian health system? I know it's a federalized system. How is it a little bit different? Are there some pros and some cons to that kind of system that you can share a little bit?
Yeah. So I think we're blessed to live in a system where we don't have to worry about access to healthcare, regardless of, where you come from or your wealth. We all have accessibility to healthcare. It's equal that way. And we don't pay, like in Alberta specifically, we don't pay any fees. It's all paid provincially. So there was a time where we had to pay a certain fee for our health annually, and now we don't have to pay anything. So I like that. So I think some of the things that aren't pros would be just that accessibility for surgery and stuff like that, because you get waitlisted. Whereas I think if you had a privatized health system, people that could afford to pay more, you know what I'm trying to say, is they'd be able to get what they need. And so I think that's definitely a downside, as well as we don't have, like I live in a city of over 100,000 people, and we have probably 6 rural communities. But we have no walk-in clinics after 5:00. We don't have any urgent care. All we have is the one Emerg department.
Oh,
yeah.
Man, that probably makes that emergency room busy.
Crazy. It's crazy. And some of my rural Emerges are seeing the equivalent of what our urban Emerg is seeing, because people have nowhere else to go. And so I think that if we had a different healthcare system, we probably wouldn't be seeing this. And our physicians as well. We've lost a lot of our physicians to the States or to other places because they are fee for service. And so again, that doesn't necessarily bode well, because if they only see 5 patients, they're only getting paid for 5 patients.
Yeah.
So that's not conducive to somebody being able to support their family.
Yeah. Do you have any sense on how the wages compare for physicians or for nurses from the States to Canada?
Yeah, I know across the States, you guys have a vast wage difference. Like in California, it's like over $100 an hour. And I know in some of the central states, it's not. So in Alberta, we are the highest paid nurses in Canada. I believe BC, I think, will be taking that lead because they just got a pay raise. But so here, for example, we have a 9-step, whatever, people work up each step. So I think the starting wage would probably be around $30, and you would top out around 50 something. Now, as an educator, you do get paid a little bit more. So, I'm not afraid. I'm making like $59.97 an hour as an educator. And that's considered that's like top, like almost like with managers, because managers are out of scope. I'm in scope.
What does out of scope, in scope mean?
In scope means I'm protected by my union. So I work within a union, and out of scope, you're not. So you could get fired at any time, and you don't get wage increases. Like you don't get that annual step up.
Gotcha.
So my husband was a middle manager in where we lived for 10 years, and I was making a penny less than him when he was still in his role. Wow. Which is sad, because he's managing like a cardiorespiratory department.
Yeah.
Right? A lot more pressure than what I'm dealing with as an educator.
There's a lot of pressure for management, for sure.
Yeah.
But you want to pay educators well too. One of the things that we have, one of the problems we have here in the States is a lot of nurses who work bedside are making way more than they would as an educator or in a education role. And it makes it hard for nurses to then want to go take those roles.
Oh yeah. Cause see, we're the opposite. We get paid more. We're equivalent to like a head nurse. Like an educator would be equivalent to a head nurse role, which is the way it should be, because I have to teach all the courses. I have to stay up to date, and you have to manage people, even if it's not like officially discipline wise that way, but you're still having to manage their education, ensure that they're, meeting accreditation standards, because we have accreditation standards for across Canada. So that's part of the role that we have, right? So, and I also, in my role, I do physician education as well as the residents. So in our simulations and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, how does most nurses in Canada, bachelors prepared? Or are they associates prepared?
So now they're all, like I said, I graduated in 1994, and in 2002, everyone had to be degree nursing. So then for all of that, those of us that were RNs, they did offer a post RN BN program so that we could become equivalent to what was graduating, right? So I did take that opportunity in 2011 to go back and do that program. I had already started my degree, but I still had some courses to finish. And I'm actually very thankful that I did, because I do think that there is benefit to education. And I do think my degree did give me skills that I didn't just have in my diploma. And our licensed practical nurses where I live in Alberta, they're taking the same program that I took to be an RN for their LPN.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now the LPNs are more like a diploma nurse more than, and all the programs then, are they associate's degree or bachelor's degree? Is that
they're bachelor? So we have the Bachelor of Nursing, which I don't think you guys have, because I know when I became an ENA member, I had to ask them to add it to the profile because I'm like, it's a degree, it's a Bachelor of Nursing degree. And and then some of them might have a Bachelor's of Science, but yeah.
So I think most in the States are Bachelor's of Science in nursing.
Ours is just called Bachelor of Nursing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Okay. Yeah, same thing. So interesting. And then do they do master's prepared, doctorate prepared in Canada?
So you can. I do notice, though, it's a lot more prevalent, I feel, within the States, because I see it in everybody's like signatures. Whereas here, unless you wanted to teach like so even at the university, like when I graduated with my degree, they hired me on and I did teach students part-time for a while. I did both jobs, and they wanted me to get my master's and they would have paid for me to do it. But I just didn't. I was 40 something years old. I was like, I don't want to. So I chose to get my Emerg certification instead. But our colleges and universities, those nurses would be the masters or the PhDs. And then our nurse practitioners up here, they do the masters to get their nurse practitioner. However, they're not paid any different than the nurses yet. So we're kind of behind.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And that has to do with physicians, right? Because we have a few physician assistants up here, but they don't work the way they would in the States. They still have to work under supervision, and they don't have the freedom to do what they would be able to do in the States. So I have a girlfriend who's a physician assistant, but she works like a hospitalist taking care of geriatric patients.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. Oh, definitely a little bit of differences between the US and Canada there.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
So, now you mentioned the Emerg certification. Is that the same BCEN certification that like most folks in the US are familiar with?
Yes. So again, when I joined ENA and I was like, they're like, oh, you have to get Emerg certified. And I'm like, but I am. And it's the same. It's a board certified exam that we have to take, and we have to do it every 5 years. And you have to either do so many hours or else you can challenge the exam. So it's the equivalent. Yeah.
So it's specifically for Canada, or is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming because the US only recognizes the BCEN.
Okay. All right.
No, it's called CEN, sorry. The Certified Emerg Nurse. But I'm a certified Emerg nurse, but it's ENC, it's called. It's Emerg Nurse Certified. So
okay.
I'm not really sure what the differences are, but I'm Emerg certified no matter where I go, but I'm not sure if the States would recognize that.
Gotcha.
Or not. But ENA they've added it to our profile so we can.
That's awesome.
It is.
So you can show that off.
Yeah.
The last question I have to ask you is a question I call 3 things. And it's the hardest question, but it's asking you, and this is actually probably an easy question for you because as a nursing educator, What are 3 things you always tell your emergency nurses to always remember? And what are 3 things that they can just forget?
So be accountable for your practice. My biggest pet peeve is, for example, I don't do that. I don't do that. And it's like, you know what? Or I've never been told that. And it's like, yeah, you have. I'd rather you say, I haven't ever done one, or I haven't done one in a while. Can you please show me? Than to tell me that you don't do that or you've never been taught, because I know that's not true. The other thing is be teachable, right? And never stop learning, because we're in a career where it's evidence-based. And so I think it's super important to always make sure that you're teachable and never stop learning, because learning in nursing is lifelong. And when you're not teachable anymore, then that's where I think you need to find somewhere else to go, because there's just no place for that. And then the other thing is get involved, because even if it's in a quality improvement project within your own department, or if it's provincial or national, involvement, you can, like I said, sit on a couch and commentate about all the things that aren't going well. But if you're not going to, be available or be part of that change or process, or if you have such great ideas, then let's get together and talk about them. Then you really have no reason to be speaking about it at all. So those would probably be my 3 biggest things.
All right. And what are the 3 things that they can just forget, that just don't do, forget about it?
So, if you make a mistake, right, just not forget about it, but forget about it, right? So do your RLS, own up to it, but forget about it. So it's a reported learning system. So whatever your system looks like, to acknowledge if it was a med error, but then forget about it, because it happens, and don't let that guide your practice going forward, because then you're going to always feel like a failure, right? Another thing would be just your peers, right? People have bad days and people can be mean, or patients can be mean. And you need to just forget about that and just recognize that you have to meet them where they're at. You're probably not seeing them at their best. They're sick. They're not feeling well. You're that kind person on the other side that's getting the brunt of whatever's going on in their life. And the other thing I would say, you don't want to forget about your patients, like the ones that pass away or the outcomes that aren't great, but you need to forget about that it, not that it's your fault, but you need to recognize that it's part of what we do. Like you and I talked about, it's part of the job that we have. And so you need to forget about if there's any guilt associated with the outcome that happened to that patient, because as long as you did your best, you can't change that. And so you just need to forget about that when you go home, because you just can't take that with you, or we would never be able to continue on in this career.
We'd never be able to get out of bed. We'd never be able to get out of bed. We'd be just a puddle.
Right?
Awesome. Great advice. Holy cow. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me. And I'm so glad we got a chance to meet at the last conference. And I'm so excited to have you. The International Committee is something I'm super excited about, just because I love seeing people from all different worlds and all different areas, and just how we all, what a small community nursing really is.
And it is. And I like that you said that, because we talk about from all over the world. ENA as a global organization, global. That's just it. You're global. And so I love that we're able to get together. We're able to meet, share these experiences, because I think we find out that we're really more similar than we are different. And so 100%. I think that's really exciting to me. Yeah.
100%. I totally agree. So I'm super excited, and I'll see you in San Diego.
I can't wait. Absolutely.
That'd be very cool.
Awesome.
I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Thanks for taking so much time for me. And I'm so excited we finally got a chance to do this.
Me too.
And I appreciate you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.